we printed for the first half of the class. So for those that were not here, they're going to miss the printing portion. But let's talk about floors, okay?
They're going to be worried when they find out the printing portion was over an hour.
Yeah.
It's clearly not as easy as we expected it to be.
Printing is by far the worst part of working. Yep. You think that when you're done with the project, you're like, oh, all I have to do is print. 5 hours goes by and you're like, oh, I'm almost printed. Paper goes out, plotter toner goes out, you don't have any, you have to go get some. You know, you print, it goes the wrong direction, you run out of paper, you have to reload the paper, then your computer shuts off and your PDF corrupts, and then you have to do it again and somebody else gets in front of you. You know, it's scaled wrong, right? And then you get into a meeting and somebody pulls out their architectural scale and you're like, please, please, for the love, tell me it's scaled right. Right? Please, hopefully I checked that box.
She fills me with such hope working
it's
on this in the future.
It's wonderful.
But now floors.
Now onto floors. Now onto floors.
This can't be worse.
I know. It only took us an hour and 15 minutes to do the printing, so it's not too bad. So I guess my point is, don't just think, oh, I'm done with the project, I'm going to go to school and print really fast, because it doesn't happen, right? Anyway, all right, so let's talk about floors. I'm going to go into a 3D view here.
Ready.
And you all will notice right now that we don't have any floors in here, right? We have the upper walls, we have the lower walls, sorry, and then we just kind of have this area where there's nothing, okay? If I go into like an elevation view, north elevation here, you guys all have this, but I don't have it. I've kind of left a little gap where my floors are going to go, right? Or you guys have left a gap for where your floors are going to go. So I'm going to have to change a few things here. I'm going to have to add a level.
Yeah, you better. I was going to tell us we had to change.
I love the commentary. You guys are much more lively than my last year's 8 to 10 o'clock class.
Hey, we told you day one. Delightful group of people.
There you go. There you go. Okay. So this is going to be one thing you'll get used to in Revit, right? You have to leave space for building elements. So I leave space for my footing. I have my wall here, right? I'm going to have to leave space for my joists, right? And we'll work with kind of the aesthetics of it, probably not tonight, but maybe next time, because you're going to have some aesthetic issues with yours, likely. But let's talk about floors, okay? I'm going to call this level my bottom of joist. And then I have my main level dimension plan. So usually, you know, you want to leave a good cavity space for your joists. I mean, plan on the largest space possible that you could possibly think would go in there, and then you can always adjust, like shrink it. It's easier to shrink that space than it is to grow it. Let me just say that, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into my main level area plan, floor plan, okay? And I want to create a floor, and not on that floor plan. This is what happens when you rename everything to suit your needs. Okay, click. There we go. Floors are not really different in terms of creating new floors, right? We've created new wall types, we've created new component types, and it always involves editing an element that is closest to the object you want to generate, right? So if you want to create a gypsum board wall, then you'd find the closest gypsum board wall that is already existing in Revit. You'd hit edit, you'd rename it, you'd redefine it, and then you would use it, essentially, right? And it's going to be no different for your floors, right? So when we create a new floor type or a new floor assembly, in essence, it's really just a wall that's laying flat, right? So a floor assembly is going to be just like a wall assembly, but it's laying flat. And to create a new floor assembly, you're going to choose a floor assembly closest to the floor assembly you want to put in your project. You're going to duplicate it, rename it, redefine it, and then you're going to use it, okay? So same process, exact same process you follow with walls, essentially, for floor assembly creation, okay? And we'll go through that too. What's different from wall assemblies to floor assemblies and creation is really in the methods of how you draw the outlines, right? How you're going to define the boundary of these, right? Walls they're vertical in nature, right? Floors in general are horizontal in nature. And so with a wall, it makes sense that when we define a wall, the shape of a wall, we draw a length to define where it goes, its path. And then we have a top constraint and we have a bottom constraint. That's going to be our definition, okay? With a floor, we somewhat define the depth of it in the wall, in the assembly, the floor assembly, okay? But then in order to create the outline of the floor, we have to sketch it, all right? So we're going to have to go into what's called sketch mode to create our floors. If you come up here to architecture and you come over here to floor and we click down, we have architectural floor. We have these other types we're not going to worry about. Again, structural, I'm not going to get into these other things right now, but specifically we don't use structural floors, right? Because we've had that discussion. Structural items, right, as opposed to architectural items and why we don't use them. So we're going to get into floors. I'm going to click on floor, architectural, right? Yep. And my model somewhat grays out, okay? I'm going to notice that my drawing tools pop up here at the top. So I have a finish edit mode, I have a cancel, and I have a boundary line set ready to be drawn. And then I have a bunch of editing tools here, right? And these editing tools will help me draw the outline of where I want my floor to go, right? But essentially, I'm just going to draw an outline of where I want my floor to lay within my project, okay? Now, this is kind of the eternal question. I'm going to change my detail level to fine. Hold on, let me cancel out of this real quick. I'm going to change my exterior wall type. The eternal question with walls, and this is something that if you're just kind of a new design student, you likely won't know the answer to. So I'm not really going to be super rigid, or I'm not going to really worry about how you do it. Let me just say this. I'm being very obscure. But essentially there's really like an important relationship between your wall assembly and your floor assembly, right? So when you think about it, like if we just draw a basic wall, right? You've got your foundation here, okay? And you've got the top of foundation and you have your little sill plate right there. And then you have your rim board here. And then you have your joist kind of resting in here, right? And then you've got your plywood coming down. This is exaggerated. That's not good. This is exaggerated. Your plywood, and we'll just very simply say we have a stud coming in like this, right? So if we have our plywood right there, maybe we have like a piece of, like a really thick, you know, stone veneer or something, brick or whatever happening out here, right? So if I were to think of my floor like this, and my floor coming in this way, my floor is essentially, you know, if my plywood's on the outside here, my floor is going to come in and it's going to rest close to the plywood, right? In this case, which could be different somewhere else. I'm trying to think of another condition where, let's say there's just another instance. I can't think of one right now, right? But maybe instead of, here's our foundation, maybe instead of our joist coming out to the plywood, maybe there's something there that it needs to go to instead, right? Maybe it just, we'll pretend this doesn't happen usually, right? But maybe the wood stud just sits right on the foundation wall, right? So instead of, and the plywood runs on the outside. So instead of my floor joist running in and hitting the plywood, they're going to stop, you know, 2.5 inches from the outside of the wall, right? So my floor system would be drawn like this, right, in here. So if I were to look at that in floor plan view, and my wood kind of outlines this border, this is a horrible drawing, guys, sorry. Right? If I were to draw this, my floor would be drawn to the inside of that line, which would line up with that line right there, right? As opposed to this instance where, you know, if I have a wall system, like, let's go back to the screen. It's going to be a lot more clear on the screen. If I have a wall system where I have this plywood and my, you know, I've got a stud, I have plywood, I have an air gap, and I have some masonry right here, my floor is going to want to be drawn all the way to the point of the drywall, or the plywood, okay? So for those of you that maybe know a little bit more about this and how things go together, you can really kind of choose where your floor system is going to fall, right? For those of you that don't really know a whole lot about this and don't know where, you know, your joists end in the wall, we're just, it's fine, I think, for you guys to make an educated guess, okay? So if you don't know and you just want to guess, I would say take your floor system to the face of your inside of your plywood. We'll just say that, okay? But it, like, realistically, this is probably one of the biggest deals in a building. You know, when you're drawing these in Revit, this will be one of the #1 things people will look for in your models to make sure it's correct. Hey, where are your floor joists ending, right? Where is your slab edge? Where are things kind of in relation to one another? Anyway, so that was kind of a side topic, but a big topic. So back to what we were doing. Architectural floor. Okay. So we've entered sketch mode, right? And we have to sketch the boundary of our floor, right? So again, there's our kind of where I got into the side topic of where the floor is going to be drawn, right? But we have a bunch of tools that we can use to draw the boundary. I'm just going to click on my little line tool here, and I'm going to sketch a closed region that's going to be my floor, essentially. A closed region is something, let me just off to the side here create an example. A square is a closed region, okay? Closed regions, when you draw closed regions, the floor will function. You can hit finish. I'm going to hit finish, and that floor will be generated, okay? If I don't create a closed region, meaning I come in here, I draw my floor, and I get very close to the end, but I don't quite close those lines, that's not a closed region, right? For those of you that use AutoCAD, if you can hatch something, it's a closed region, right? If you can't, it's not closed. That is not a closed region. If I hit finish, I will get an error, and Revit will say, hey, wait a minute, it's not going to work, okay? All right, so I'm going to delete those. So essentially now, you know, knowing that I have to have a closed region for my floor, I'm just going to draw the boundary of my floor on my floor plan. And you will notice I'm on my, you know, whatever floor I'm drawing. So if I'm drawing my main level floor plan or main level floor, I want to be on my main level floor plan. If I'm drawing my basement level floor, then I want to be on my basement level floor plan. Okay. So in this case, I'm at my main level. You're going to notice that we have floor types right here that we can pick from. I'm just going to choose one that's predefined here. Wood truss, 12-inch joist, carpet finish. Very nice, right? And I'm going to draw the boundary of my floor. So click. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to trace. That's the face of my plywood. I'm having a hard time snapping to that corner. I'm going to cheat a little bit and come back, I think. There we go. So I just start drawing my lines. I move around the boundary of my floor plan. Right? Very nice. Again, we're in sketch mode. Bring it all the way out here. I don't think I have this model quite properly generated, but close it up, right? So now when I look at this, I'm going to tab and select it all. That is the region that my floor is going to occupy, okay? And I've drawn it in a closed region, right? Hopefully. Sometimes you don't pick up on mistakes that you've made until Revit tells you you've made a mistake. But that is going to be my boundary. Yep. A mile. Are you sure?
Roughly. Oh, and what is it doing?
Oh yeah, okay, zoom out a little bit. Just keep going. It's because you were very far zoomed in. Don't worry about that just yet. That's going to have quite a slope.
So we don't care about how close we are to the corner, you're saying?
What do you mean? Well, I mean, you want to hit the corner, but it's okay if you're zoomed out when you draw. Is that what you're asking?
Just zoom in on the corner when I'm...
Yep. There you go. Okay, so let me address that. Okay. Okay, here's something that Paul over here is running into, right? So you're drawing right now, Paul, and yours is by far worse than mine, right? But what you're sorry. By far worse. It's significant. It's significant. Significant. Well, what's happening on his is that you have your thin lines turned on. Watch the setting, TL, thin lines, right? So for whatever reason, his is even being more accentuated. His lines look a lot thicker. You're zoomed in pretty far, so his look like pretty thick like that.
Yeah.
if I type TL, see how it goes back to a regular line, like zero, we'll call that a zero thickness. Okay, and you also are in shaded view, SD, shaded, right? Hidden line, HL, will take you back to black and white, which is pretty nice, okay? What is hard about thin lines? TL. So this is a good example. What's hard about thin lines is that sometimes when I'm drawing, do you see how it's a little bit harder to kind of like see where you are on that line, right? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you're like, well, where do I snap? Where does it exactly end, right? I can't quite get it. If I go to TL, thin lines, it is somewhat easier to like actually get on that object. You see that? So if you have TL, if you have very thick lines like this, TL, thin lines, go back to this point and then you can draw with that, and I think it's going to be easier. Another thing that if I couldn't quite like snap to an endpoint, which you were having a hard time doing, right? Likely because you had thin lines turned on. What I would have done is I would have just drawn it close to it, right? You see me do this all the time. I get my objects as close as I can, and then when I'm done, I fudge them, and then I go back and fix them, though. I revise it, right? So I go AL, align, click, click, and I fix it. AL, click, click.
My menu is all grayed out now.
Your menu?
My like wall, door, window, everything. I can't click on any of that. I started hitting some of these buttons you say to hit.
There's your menu again. Now you can start drawing again.
Oh, so it's still got me in the.
Yeah, you were just on the wrong tab.
It still has me in the flooring though. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Are you having trouble here?
Well, I traced
Okay.
around. What do I do?
Okay.
Did we get that far, or am I?
The anticipation is killing you, right? Did you have a question?
Stop being so
Okay.
ahead of the curve, Dawn.
All right. So we've drawn our boundary, right? This is going to be these lines right here. These are going to talk about. We're going to talk about sloping floors. That's what that has to do with. Not right now. But once I have my entire boundary selected, okay, I could choose my floor type before or after I draw the lines. It doesn't really matter, right? I'm going to choose to finish the floor sketch, okay? So I'm going to come up here to the green check, click, finish sketch mode. For this, in this case, I'm just going to choose no, and I have a floor.
Mine just has the dumb R.
Hit escape. There you go. Okay. So I hit finish, and here's my floor. So if I go into 3D, it's a little green check at the top of the screen right there. Yep. There you go.
Blue.
And it worked.
I have blue carpet.
You have blue carpet.
You have blue.
Okay. I have salmon colored carpets. Even better, right?
So why did you say no to having the walls attached to the bottom of that?
So what that does is it establishes a constraint. So instead of the walls going from your basement level up to bottom of joist, right? It essentially will take your walls and attach it, which is a lock to the bottom of your floor.
What's the problem?
So if you move your floor, it's not generally a problem, but if you move your floor, your walls flex with that floor, which you're thinking, well, that's great, right? Unless you don't want your walls to flex with your floor. So it essentially takes the top constraint and detaches it from your actual level and attaches it to the floor. That becomes your datum. So it's okay if you want that to happen.
Something that you could go back in and choose one of those walls and
Apparently I chose blue.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
that was just putting an extra step in there.
It's trying to help you essentially, but again, in my experience, I feel like the idea of the constraints is magic, right? Until it's not. And you're like, why did I attach all of those things to the floor when I should have kept them attached to a level that I could then control independent of other objects?
Blue about it.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So now that you want the exterior wall finish, I mean, how do you get that back into your floor system now that you left that gap? You know what I mean? Instead of just going all the way till the
How can we
edge.
throw our LP siding around?
How
the
do you bring it
outside?
down? Okay. That's, well,
That's the next step.
yes, that'll be next. Because I remember I said, we're gonna have some aesthetic problems, right? That's the aesthetic problem we have. So we're gonna get back to that. But let's finish the floors and we'll come back to that.
I got some nice red shag carpet going.
Okay.
Looks like. Yeah, buddy.
Okay. So everybody have their floor? Okay.
I do. It's gorgeous.
So here's what is happening to probably a lot of your projects right now. So you probably have a gap, and it looks somewhat like that, right? Or I mean, you have something happening. You know, your floor may come out into that space, but you might just have a little bit of a gap happening. Okay, we're going to come back to that because that's not a floor issue, that's a wall issue, and I want to show you how to edit the walls to cover that gap essentially. Okay, so we will talk about that, but I wanted to get through floors initially today. Now I can grab my floor, click, and I can use my drop down and I can change it to something else, ceramic tile, perhaps, right? And if I go to my elevation, click, or actually what I really wanted, sorry, when I said elevation, I meant section, click. Now I can see my floor system in there.
And then just to change up rooms, you would section them off in that same drawing.
To do what again?
Like, to change like a different room to a different type of flooring, nice section it off.
Mine just is red.
There's a couple of different schools of thought on that, right? That's going to be something. So the question we have that Greg has is okay, you've put this floor structure in here, right? That's great. It's going through the entire house. What happens when the kitchen wants wood floor, the bedrooms want carpeting, the bathroom wants tile, you know, we have concrete somewhere. So this is going to be somewhat of an office standard that wherever you end up working or wherever if you're working on your own, that you're going to decide. So some firms, they throw in the structural floor, right? So we have the joists and the plywood on top. That's our structural floor, okay? Then they go in after the fact and they create 3 or 4 different floors that are only defined as tile and they're 1 inch thick, or wood floor, 3/4 inch thick. And they go on top of this, and per room they outline the room and they add a second faux floor or a finished floor on top of the structural floor, right?
You wouldn't actually section your structural floor, you would just put toppers on top.
Yes. Now another way of going about it, instead of adding that little topper, because if the problem with the topper is that it follows the walls, right? So if the walls move, you have to go around and kind of move the floor with it every time you move a wall. Yeah. It's a pain in the neck, right? It's a pain in the neck. It gets very cumbersome, and if you miss it, it's a drawing error.
It's not AutoCAD, so it's fine.
We can fudge it in AutoCAD at least, right? So what some firms have done is they apply just a faux hatch pattern through a color legend essentially. In Revit we can apply color schemes to our drawings, and it will say, you know, and we'll talk about assigning rooms to these projects pretty soon, but when you assign a room, you can assign tile to that room, and then we can apply a color scheme, and the color scheme makes it look like there's actually a floor in there when there's not.
When you went into a section,
it wouldn't show the thickness of it. Yeah. It's, I mean, you know, yeah, basically, yeah.
So looking at the interior section and where we put the flooring, it's obviously intersecting those foundation walls, right?
Right.
So then you have to go through and tell it how those are going to interact.
Yes. So you're saying like right here, it's
Right.
Yes. Yep. All right. So what happens when we need to, I'm going to talk about 2 more things tonight and then we'll stop. What happens when we want to edit the floor, number 1, and number 2, if we want to create a hole in the floor, okay? So floors, and you're going to start finding this about a lot of things in Revit, these objects are kind of boundary sensitive, right? Or edge sensitive, which means that if I want to select my floor to edit it and I click on the floor, click, I can't find it, you're going to see me a lot of time move to the edge of my drawing or where I know the boundary of my floor is, and I want you to look down here, but I'm going to hover over the boundary, and you see it says door. Okay, no, I'm going to tab, there's my, you see how down there in the bottom left it says wood joist floor, click, and I've selected my floor. I'm going to find more success hovering around an edge boundary and tab, click, and finding that floor. Okay, once I have it selected, I can come up here to my menu and hit edit boundary. selecting, okay, so here's the other thing. Let me show you. If you, let me get out of there. Dang it. So if you are doing everything you can to try and select that floor and you just can't, you're likely going to have to draw a quick section through your building. Click, click, and click on the floor there and hit edit boundary. Okay, so move near an edge where a wall like this, where you know there's a floor boundary, tab, tab, click, and it may not even look like you're selecting it, but in the bottom left-hand corner you'll see it, right?
Mine was just bouncing between like wall options.
Oh, did you finally get it though?
No.
Move your mouse a little bit then.
To the section.
Okay, so if you go the section route, click, click, you're going to click on the floor, hit edit boundary, and then it's going to say, hey, that's great, but to sketch this, you have to be in a view capable of sketching where you can see the boundary. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to main level, maybe, there we go, and I'm back in sketch mode. So now I can go and I can move these, right? I can trim them, I can do anything I need to do to get the right boundary, right? Now this will include creating holes in my floors for like stairs to pass through, okay? So if I wanted to, I can't leave an open region, right? We talked about that, but I can create a region within a region that is closed. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So if I come in here, I can click on the square or whatever. I can click another closed region within the other closed region, and when I hit finish, I'm gonna hit no there. I have a hole in the floor right there. Okay, I'm gonna hit undo and go back into that sketch. I can also, right, I can click here. I can also, like those stairs that are kind of at the edge of the wall, right, I can click and I can, you know, draw a boundary like this, and I can split. We talked about the split tool, right? Go to modify split. Split this outer wall, click, and trim, TR. Click, 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 and do you see how now this kind of comes in, my boundary leaves a little gap right there between the wall and that edge of the floor. Hit finish, go to 3D, and there's my floor with an opening for the stairwell. It works, it works. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it at that for tonight because I feel like we've had a lot.
I made my stairs about a mile long.
You guys are gonna love this.
We're
The
gonna
stairs are the best. I keep saying this a lot, but like, I don't know how many of you have ever drawn a stair section, right, in AutoCAD. It takes so long, right? It takes so long, and it's just great. Stairs in Revit are great because it's so much nicer. Anyway,
So, another question.
Yes.
So say we got our basement, you got your structural wall that goes down that we've already scaled out. How would you know where that is in relation?
oh, to your foundation wall,
Yeah,
or
to the actual wall that was supposed to be built in the basement. You know what I mean? Like,
no? Oh, okay. So if you go to your main level, so if I'm going to go to the basement level here and draw a wall right there, right? So I'm going to draw a wall right here real quick. Oop, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go from basement up to the bottom of joist. Basement. What is going on?
I think didn't you make a new, or you were going bottom of the joist too?
Yeah, I don't know well, we'll just do that for now. So I've drawn a wall here, right? And I want to be able to see that and reference that wall right here, but I can't view it from the main level, right? If you remember over here in properties, I have an underlay option where I can choose to see my basement level from my main level, and it just shows me an outline.
Okay,
So-
I can just pull that right into that and done.
Yep, exactly. Okay. So we'll finish up floors when we meet on Wednesday. We'll finish up floors and we'll talk about roofs. Okay. I'll post an assignment for floors, so if you want to get going, you can get going on it. But otherwise, I'll post 2 more assignments, one for a roof and one for a floor Wednesday. And I think Wednesday, if we have time, I'll also talk about our midterm project.
So we're gonna go over floors a little more on Wednesday.
Yes. Yep.
You already have an assignment that says floor and roof together. Are you going to just separate those then? Or?
Is it already posted? Did I post it?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll stick with that one then.
Okay, it's on page 6.
Yeah, that's it. Yes, Paul, that sounds right.
Good.